game design and VR extravaganza here at Siebel Center today. My name is John Toenjes. I'm a professor in the Department of Dance, and I have two other presenters with me today. One is Rochele Gloor, who works at CETL, the Center for Innovation in Teaching and Learning. And then we have our guest artist, Jody Sperling, here, who's going to show us some dances of Loie Fuller and talk about her work as an artist and choreographer. So very excited to have Jody here this week. Super excited to have her here. The reason that she is here is I invited her here because for several years now, it's been a long process, which is kind of an interesting thing I hope you might ask some questions about. I've been working on a VR project called Master Dancer. And this project features a historical dancer named Loie Fuller. Loie Fuller was born in a suburb of Chicago, Hinsdale. I don't know if any of you are from Chicago, but you can feel an affinity with her. And she was a vaudeville actress who kicked around the States for quite a while, but then she moved to Paris and became the talk of the town in Paris, quite a famous artist in the Belle Epoque, it's called, or the late 19th, early 20th century. She was a star of the Art Nouveau movement because her art was very new. Art Nouveau means new art. And she was quite an inventive person. You'll see some of the costumes. Jody is going to dance in some of the Loie Fuller-like costumes that revolutionized theater. She was really, I think, one of the reasons I focused on her is I do a lot of work in interactive dance performance, and I regard Loie Fuller as like the very first interactive dance theater artist ever, because she used these voluminous costumes, which you'll see actually on the picture, there was one, to transform herself from a human into all kinds of shapes. And she was quite an inventor, and she had a lot of patents for theatrical lighting. And so she was the first person to kind of use technology to transform dance into something more than just the moving human body. So this project, Master Dancer, started, as I said, a couple of years ago. And it's basically a dance adventure. I call it a dance adventure, not a game necessarily in virtual reality, because it has it's a game. My idea was to use gaming to teach dance creativity. So there are a lot of dance games, like O-Shape or Beat Saber, whatever, things come at you and you got, do this, or do that. And you learn those kinds of things. But I was thinking more, how can I teach creative movement through virtual reality games? So gaming is a little different from art because gaming has kind of these four components. It has goals, which art doesn't necessarily have goals. It has rules, and art doesn't necessarily have rules. And it has a feedback system, and art doesn't necessarily have a feedback system other than like how much applause you get as a performer. And also this kind of voluntary participation. That's, of course, very similar. And the reason I got into it is because how popular gaming is among the audiences, because it's my personal mission as a professor here at the University of Illinois in the dance department to try to keep dance abreast of technological changes and to keep those things alive in contemporary dance. So this dance adventure has two goals. One is creative training, to try to train people to move creatively according to what we call in the dance world movement qualities, and also to do some sort of historical cultural education. That's where Loie Fuller comes in to the picture. It's not going to the next slide. There we go. Okay, so again, I told you a little bit about Loie Fuller. If you want to learn more about her, which I hope you do, this is the first plug. Thursday evening at 5 p.m., Jody Sperling is going to give a lecture, which is called Ecokinetics and the Art of Loie Fuller at the Spurlock Auditorium at 5 p.m., and it's going to be the best lecture ever. So that's the first plug, and you'll learn more about Loie Fuller Thursday at 5 p.m. And this person, Rudolf Laban, was an inspiration also. He really codified this idea of movement qualities in a way that a lot of computer scientists now use Laban movement analysis as a way to analyze movement in computers because it's quite codified. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what movement qualities are now. If I move my hand like this, I have moved it quickly, kind of not in a specific direction, so we call it indirect, and kind of light, right? But if I move my hands like this, it's very strong, it's very direct, right? And it's also very quick. So these movement qualities, strength, speed, direction, and force, are kind of the basis for Laban movement analysis. So, moving right along. I think I'll skip this. Well, this is kind of basically how it goes. This is the early version. Things have become a little different, which I'll talk about quickly too. I don't want to get too much into this. But basically, what you do is you enter a theater, which is loosely modeled after the Art Deco or Art Nouveau style. That is all going to change, by the way, because of my association with the studio. You meet Loie Fuller, you do some movement training activities, which I call, well, you'll see them. And then you earn different prizes, etc. And then finally you get to dance with Loie Fuller. So I think I'll skip all this stuff, actually. And just talk a little bit about how a VR project is built, because I have learned a lot. And I hope if you guys start doing VR projects, you'll realize that they are quite involved and quite complicated. And I'm very happy to today be helping to promote the studio, which is a new effort on campus run by Dan Cermak and the Game Studies program to help you build any projects that you might have. I'm actually going to take my project that I've been building with teams of students over the years and hand it over to them so it will be much more efficiently built. But it does take a lot of time. You have to think about what scenes you're going to do. You have to think about your interactions, and there's animations, and so there's a lot of 3D modeling involved, a lot of storyboarding, programming. You need programmers, and then of course animators. And I don't know if any of you were in the MetaHuman workshop just prior to this, but you saw a little bit about animation. If you were in the MetaHuman workshop, this is a MetaHuman, so I think I'll skip that, but we've been using those in this project as well. Okay, we'll skip that because there's more to talk about. So, all right, so. Yes, I want to talk a little bit about this.
The Smart Suit allows us to capture animations anywhere. There is no need for a sophisticated motion capture studio, as the suit
That terribly.
system will allow us to accurately recreate historical.
So, one of the things, and Rochelle's going to talk about this a little bit also, one of the things I wanted to talk about was the idea of animating a character. And central to this effort, of course, was animating Loie Fuller, which turned out to be a tremendously difficult task. Easy because we have this Rococo suit, which actually I brought here to show you real quick. in order to animate in virtual reality, you have to have motion capture. And motion capture has been made a lot easier these days with this thing called the Rochele Studio. So it's just this little suit that you slip on, and it's got a lot of sensors built into it and wires and things. But you don't need to be in any special space. You can actually do parkour with this and capture the movement, because it actually already has its own Wi-Fi router built into it, and all you need is to, if somebody's running along, just follow them with your laptop, and you can record their motion. So we're using this suit, and Rochele will talk a little bit more about this, to capture the movement of the dancers in the animation. And it's particularly a cool thing because you'll see later on in the video how we're able to capture the movement of Jody underneath her costume with this suit. There are some other systems like video capture systems that work quite well but would not work in this instance. So that's one little bit about technology used in this. So I think I'll skip to the second version, actually. So we had an original version of this, but then, okay, so let me pause this. So then I've gone through various iterations of this, and one of the difficulties of building virtual reality apps in a university setting is that all you wonderful students learn how to do these things. But in contrast to our previous speaker, who had these amazingly beautiful and super professionally done games, where he has a studio, he said, of 130 professional game builders doing this stuff. I've built this with a team of 3 or 4 students every year, and you all are very talented and all that, but you tend to graduate, and so so every year I have to replace the team of students, and so it gets difficult to do these things. But then every year also things have changed. So right now, this is I showed this app at a conference in Italy in September, which was a conference about digital research in humanities and the arts. So I'll show you, this is one person just going through the app, and I'll just give you an idea of what the app is like at this current state. And of course, we're going to do version 3 later on this year. But I'll just show you this, and I'll narrate it as we go. So when you start up the app, is this going to go? Yeah. So when you start it up, you can save your name, and then there is a theatrical opening to this. And so then, can you all see this, by the way? Okay. Then, sorry. I did the wrong thing. There we go. I'll just let it go and talk through it. So the curtain opens and you find yourself in the theater lobby. And so it talks to you about what the dance is about, what the app is about with Loie Fuller. And so in the lobby, which you can see is beautifully built by Han Ni, I think she built this within Unreal Engine, actually. On this side are a bunch of posters contemporaneous with Loie Fuller. And so you go through them, and I tell you about the different posters, the different artists that created posters for Loie Fuller. And a little bit about the music. The music you're hearing is music that was written for a show by Loie Fuller called Salome. And this poster was printed, this is a picture that was painted by, or drawn by Toulouse-Lautrec of Loie Fuller. She was, that famous that Toulouse-Lautrec actually drew a bunch of things for her. And this is a poster from the 1900 Paris World's Fair, where she had her very own theater. And there was quite a bit of interest in Japanese art at that time, which comes back into play later in this app. And then over here is a picture gallery of people that she was associated with. So the first picture is of Florence Schmidt, who is quite a famous composer in the Impressionist era, who wrote this music. This is Auguste Rodin, a friend of hers. You may have heard of him, famous French sculptor. And this is a picture of Loie in her costume, another picture of Loie. And this is Stéphane Mallarmé, a very famous symbolist poet who was enamored of her too, wrote a very famous poem about her. Going through the lobby also are sculptures that were made of her contemporaneously. And over there, by the way, is a exhibit from the Curator Art Museum of books and things about Loie Fuller, and they talk a little bit about this sculpture that's coming up. Well, this sculpture too that was 3D scanned by the Minneapolis Institute of Art for this project. If I can fast forward a little bit. I can't see the mouse. There we go. So, I think I blew it. It'd be better just to play this. Oh no. Help. Yeah, I can't. Since it's playing in PowerPoint, it won't let me fast forward. It keeps going back. We're having a bit of a technical issue. By the way, there are drinks and cookies and things up there if you want for you. Can we just download the movie?
I'm gonna end the slideshow and then play this one.
Yeah. So those of you who do PowerPoint presentations, if you're playing a movie in it, it always goes back to the beginning if you want to jump ahead. So don't play it in PowerPoint. Okay, cool. Yeah. Yeah, let me go. Yeah, thank you. So after you see the sculptures, so the idea is you go through the lobby and you're learning about Loie Fuller, and also now in, okay, let me pause this. So you'll be going through the lobby and have a little book of stamps. So once you see something, once you see a poster, once you see a sculpture, you'll get a little stamp like, oh, I got this. And then you will progress through in terms of the game. Also in the lobby is a video wall where you see videos of Loie Fuller and her imitators. So as it says, no video of Loie Fuller actually exists. She had many imitators. And so all the videos that if you Google Loie Fuller and see the videos of her, they're not of her. They're of her imitators. But this is how people sort of imitated her movement. And you'll see some of this live in a little bit. Much better than this stuff. But you get the idea of how she used this voluminous costume to transform herself into various shapes. I'm going to skip through this video, which is a really pretty amazing thing. Then we have what I call are the training games. Oh, also we have a virtual Loie Fuller. And this is the next effort we're doing. And Rochelle's going to talk about the costuming. But in the next iteration of this game, I have students, I don't know if any of them are here at the moment, but they're working on incorporating artificial intelligence into this Loie Fuller avatar. So theoretically, I don't know if any of you played these AI avatar games, but you should be able to go up to her and ask her questions about her life, and she can tell you about her life. And you could, so it's really exciting to actually try to have an actual kind of almost live avatar in this app. So that's the next thing. Rochelle's going to talk about the costuming in here, and typical of me, I'm like, oh, let's see how we can make animated Loie Fuller, which is like the most difficult animation possible is to do this costuming in VR animation. And Rochele pulled it off amazingly well. And then, let's see, I'll show you the training game. So this training game is inspired by Beat Saber. How many of you played Beat Saber? A bunch, yeah. So you know what it's like. But Beat Saber, actually, this is a little bit different where you're whacking stars out into the sky. And so what this does is it trains strong, what I call strong and direct movement. Because you have to hit the star strong enough to get out into the sky, and you have to direct it so that you're creating constellations, hitting targets way out into the sky and creating constellations. So you're not just playing this game, but you're also training yourself to do strong and direct movement. So those are the movement qualities that I hope you get from this game. And I'll just play a little bit of this here. And it has a bit of a Japanese theme. Going back to that Japanese fascination, the fascination with Japanese art in the early 20th century in Paris. So I'll just let this play a little bit. So you get a little practice round, and you can see how these little stars come at you, and then you have to whack them out into the sky with both hands. And interestingly, in this, I discovered that color blindness is something you have to pay attention to in VR development, because we had somebody play it and said, well, you hit the yellow stars with your right hand and the green star. Like, I'm colorblind, I can't see that. So that's something to think about. So you can see now there's this little target out into the night sky, and as you hit it, the target moves, and we create a constellation. It's kind of a difficult game, and this is another thing we're learning, is that you really have to, when you're making a game, you have to have different levels, right, that are easy, more difficult, harder, because otherwise people get really frustrated. So you can see the constellation being created out in the sky there. And so this person was very strong, and their directness was not so good. So then they'll play it some more. And then once they're done, you get to go into the theater. And in the theater, you see Loie Fuller dance, and eventually you'll be able to dance with her if you get high enough scores in the games. And so this is the theater that was built for this app, and it's kind of tiny in this screen, but you will see, hopefully you can see the little animated Loie Fuller here. You'll see this up more close later on, but that's kind of like the payoff, is to get to see her, and eventually you'll get to dance with her as well. So that is just an overview of Master Dancer and where it's at this point. Again, just to reiterate, it's an effort to teach creative movement. There's another movement game that teaches you, instead of moving strong and direct, to move very light and indirect and turning. So it teaches you turning and very, very light movement, because if you hit the objects in that game, they fall apart if you hit them too hard. So you have to hit them just so. So anyway, that's the context for Jody Sperling's visit here. I've done that before, I'm sorry. For her visit here, and just in case you didn't understand that, Thursday night at 5 o'clock at the Sperling Auditorium, she's going to give an amazing lecture, so you should come. So now I'm going to hand the mic over to Rochele Gloor, who's going to talk about, how are we doing on time, by the way? Did I go too long? I went a long time. She's going to talk quickly about how she did the costume animation. Yeah, I got long-winded, I'm sorry.
I guess I have to use this, right? Yeah. So who is here from Game Studies and Design? Okay, so I don't know if you guys have been to the process of animating a character, and it's quite complex. I worked with John in the beginning of the year, doing research in class simulation for VR, and then after he selected some of the students from studio, I was hired to create Loie, to animate her as a full character. And it was a beautiful and very challenging process that I had around 2 months or less to create, and then I used 3 computers and 3 locations. Motion capture, but one of the points that's for me is so amazing to have Jody here, because I animated her movement, and especially like having thinking about Loie as a very important persona in the world of performance arts and a dancer, and having Jody like performing her dance and connecting that to a body that was sculpted and everything. So and I tend to think I love motion capture, and then I tend to think that as not just as something that we record data from a movement, but also that you can use that as a creative tool. And because it's very complex, the process of actually doing the workflow, so you're going to fail a lot if you are, a student. You're going to go into many errors, and then you just have to embrace them and then use that as a creative force to, just try different things, and then use flow movement. It's like inherent character, quality, like flow of movement. It doesn't need to be broken, it just needs to go around and then be used. But if someone will ask you to, animate something by tomorrow at 6 p.m., just do it. But if you go into the industry, that's kind of like the workflow that I used. Rococo, Blender, Marvelous Designer, Unreal Engine 5.2. That would be kind of like an industry called or workflow. And then for that, I went to research, select a base mesh, scoped face, capture motion data, retarget, create the garment design, simulate the cloth, animate the character, bring to Unreal Engine, and then VR. Beautiful. It was amazing. So about the digital garment design simulation, I used Marvelous Designer. So this is like a research process, creating a mood board to select, because we needed to select 2 garments. One was for the lobby scene, as you guys saw, which was this one. That was the main inspiration for that garment. And then the other one that was the final one that was like very small, like animation in the end of the game, that Jody is going to show the garment, and then I'm going to explain a little bit like how difficult it is to simulate that. So here I just like did some testing for like range of motion inside. I already had, sculpted the character in Blender and then brought to Marvelous Designer. At this point, I don't really need to have an animation within the mesh, the base mesh, the body. But I need to know what are the movements that this character is going to do when I'm creating the fabric, right? When I'm designing. So like I knew that she was going to do, this movement, and because she was going to welcome people like this, and then this garment was going to move with it. And then there was several, and then garment simulation is quite complex because you have like 50,000 trees. I had to reduce a lot to like 15, this cape, for example. So like it loses a little bit of the flexibility. Moving in 3 points in space at 1 frame at a second, right? So it's rendering. And then when you bring that to VR, you multiply it by 2, which is like 2 eyes. So, there's like some computer intense use that you need to be aware when you are creating it. So this is a plate that John took a picture at the National Museum of Cinema in Italy, and those are like real plates that we don't know if they are real or representation of the real plates that were used to create those the illustration on her garment. And then this is part of the sculpting, and this is the image that's used to sculpt in Blender.
That slide for a second. Actually, if you see here, these are glass slides, and light was projected through them, and they have the neck hole. So they were definitely used for performance. They may not have been used for Loie Fuller's performance, but if the dancer is standing out like this, then the butterfly image would appear as a projection onto her skirt. And because they had, and this here is Fire, which she was famous for, and so I'll talk a little bit more about logically.
They would use these ones in the big garment, right?
Yeah, and it was a thing.
Not for like this, for example, not for that.
Yeah, but they
also
used it at different sizes, and it was really what we, and it wasn't just Loie using it, it was a lot of followers, and they used it sometimes to simulate different national costumes. So you would be, like in a Scottish outfit and then an Italian outfit and so on, or you could be butterflies and bees and flora. So it's a whole different, and you can see sometimes the dancers, they weren't dancers, they just would stand there with their arms out. But then it could be more complex performance.
A very sustainable way to think about like changing patterns of a dress, right? In a way. And then this was the final like OBJ. This wasn't like prepared for VR yet, so you can see like her skin is very smooth. And then so these are some. So after I had the body, the mesh body, and I brought to Blender, and I had some motion capture data already. So I was trying to rig the body within Blender, and as you can see, I had like several issues as going. So this is kind of like when you parent bones to a body mesh, and then it just like had some deforming happening with the mesh for like automatic weights, some complex things. But it's quite cool to see. So I saved so many of these deforming bodies throughout those 2 months, so many of them. So this is the garment, this is Loie Fuller, correct? Is this her?
Yeah, so that's Loie Fuller, and you can see she had the sticks inside the panels, and she had the white silk, so it made a very captivating screen for her projections and lighting, and it was a canvas, and that's why people talk about her art as being kind of proto-cinematic. But I think in this context, we can actually talk about it as being like proto-motion capture, because what she was doing is creating like an abstraction. Like, what is motion capture? It's taking a very complex system of movement and simplifying it into a data set that you can use to animate an avatar, right? And what she was doing is basically abstracting and amplifying human movement without it was an analog system, right? But she was creating, she's essentially animating the silk, right? Through her movement. And so that's like and then using you might think of the silk as a kind of mesh onto which she could map projections. So, I mean, you can think of it, there is this sort of multimedia technological aspect to what she was doing, even though she was working with very simple analog tools that were material, silk and bamboo, or silk and aluminum, whatever, and also lights and projections and dyes. And I'll definitely be talking a lot more about that on Thursday.
Nice advertisement. So that's the idea of the garment I would have to create in digital form and to simulate, which I believe that you guys understand if you play games. Like most of the games don't have fluid, like soft fabric simulated because it's very computer intensive, especially for VR. there's not much space for it. So I'm gonna show this, and then I'm gonna go forward. Just so you guys know, like how inside of a Marvelous Designer, how that's simulated. I don't think it doesn't want to show. So this is the Marvelous Designer. So that square is just like is my first try to just like see how the garment would simulate. So I created that pole to try to emulate the sticks in Blender. But then when I brought to Marvelous Designer, it doesn't understand that the poles are part of the body. And then I wouldn't have time to contact them to try to change that in the system. But then here you see how that it's simulated. But then of course, like I couldn't just like use that as a square, it had to be like a round, and then the neck should be tighter. So there was a lot of processing into creating the garment that I don't have more images here, but then if someone wants to know more about like creating it, I will be happy to share. And then, because having the poles didn't work, I decided to try to extend the arms, the mesh of the arms, and then it just created this other, like, really interesting creature. Let me see. Oh, I'm not going to be able to show. No, because I'll have to wait, and no, we don't have time.
Okay.
Okay, you guys already know about motion capture. And then, so this is Jody when John went to New York to capture Jody Sperling's movement for me to target to the character of Loie Fuller. And this is like side by side. This is the Rococo view, the skeleton in Rococo. The same data that was captured. She was wearing the suit below the garment, and it's like really amazing to see the difference, because you'll never be able to see what's happening, with the body and the torso and all the movements, and then how she actually, like, we were talking about yesterday how, Jody moves, her elbows and wrists, and then we cannot really see that, below the garment.
I always try, when I've been teaching the dance students, how to do the movement, and it's a tendency to lock the elbows and to think that it's just articulating from here, and also not to realize how much you're actually using your feet and connecting to the floor and creating the spiral. And if you see in the animation, I'm actually moving and twisting and spiraling my torso quite a lot. It's not just arms. Although you'll see in the old movies with the imitators, they often are kind of stiff, and almost the comical aspect of it is the fact that they're not really fully embodied in the dance. And that's where I think if you see the photos of Loie Fuller, she has a much more kind of flow that is expressive through the body.
And this was the final animation that we added to the VR Master Dancer game. Not with the real, like, Loie Fuller's face, but that's the one that we selected. And then, do you want to dance next year like you did yesterday?
We don't have to show those other videos. I can just show that, yeah. So this sequence of movement is actually from, here, if I do it with
Can I go back?
Yeah.
Okay,
Is it a video?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this sequence of movement comes from a choreography I did for the film The Dancer, which is a Loie Fuller biopic that you can see on Apple TV. And this was the very dramatic finale of the movie, where it's, and it's danced on a podium. And yeah, I'll show this sequence of movement in the costume. So we can transition?
Yes.
Yeah. So one of the things that is kind of a rare treat is to be able to see one of the garments. These are all, of course, contemporary garments that are fashioned after the style of Loie. And I have, I'm going to wear a black one today, just because it's cool. But we have another one here that's painted, so it's like white, and actually, in terms of motion capture, you can see, it's almost like you could see the data points more. But it's extremely complex in a way that, like the Rococo suit, it has a sensor here, and it has each of the joints. But the number, if you were to try to map this, there would be really thousands of points that you to get the level of complexity or flow. And the algorithms so anyway, so you're going to see the process of transformation. So this is the garment without the inserts. So as Rochele was saying, like how in her animation something like this, right? And then what I do is I put sticks inside, right? And there are little pockets that are sewn in here. And so these get inserted. These garments are silk, and we tend to think of silk, we don't really think about textile technology as part of it, like we're trying to sort of recreate it digitally, but silk has been produced for thousands of years, and it's essentially a kind of, I don't want to say, it's an organic process that humans have exploited, right? The fibers are basically what the cocoons of the silkworm. And then in contemporary practices, the silkworms are killed, and then we extract the fibers. And one silkworm can, cocoon for one silkworm can produce I think something like 15 meters of one strand, and you need quite a lot in one. And so then those fibers are uniquely incredible for doing all kinds of things. They take dye extremely well. They create because they're these triangular fibers. So it's so interesting that you have these triangular shapes. The silk fibers are triangular. So they have, some unique properties that make it flow extremely well. So if I were just to stand like this, right, it doesn't seem so complex, right? And you could be, like here. But then what you realize is, I could just to animate this would be extremely challenging, right? And then you get it to the point where, right, so you have more than a full circle. So if I'm just going like this and we're full circle, it would raise up and you would just see my body. So, but this is one of the moves. We have named all of the moves. This is the rough, right? We call this the rough. This one we call the Houdini because you disappear, especially if you see it from the side, right? And then I think of this one as like a train, right? We have candle, right? So there's all kinds of ways that you essentially create an animation. You have an option for doing parallel movement, where there's a symmetry of the arms, where they're going together. And then this one I call the half umbrella, which is actually Loie's word for it. When I looked at some of the documents, she describes her movement. She was like, okay, you bring your right arm over your head, and you make the shape of a half umbrella, and then you bring your right arm down, and you bring your right arm up. And so this is what I kind of surmise it to be. Now you could do it, the half umbrella, sinking or rising. You could do it flat, right? You can do it where I call this one the lily, and this is everyone's favorite, the tornado, or if you're in Holland, we call it the tulip. And another one of hers was, she would say it would be, make the shape of a lily and then a rose falling to pieces. So, and this one is particularly good for screening. We call this the disc. So you have this whole vocabulary. So if you look at the animation, do you have the group animation? Because the group one, what's kind of cool is that if you can see the contrast, so I'll do the movement when she's queuing it up. So the movement for that is what I just showed you before, was be here, here, down, up, around, right? So swipe and arch, down, up, and around, right? So if you see that is the animation, right? That's basically, if I recall, is that the animation they're doing? Or there's more movement there? I like this one because it looks like a whole company. And Loie Fuller did actually have a company of young dancers that she called her muses. Yeah, so here, 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 around. And here, 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 around. And then it keeps repeating, or it was like, oh, this section goes on. And there's a point in the animation where this is such an interesting thing, where the body separates from the skirt. And that's actually really interesting. We often work with multiple dancers, where one will have the costume and one won't. And it almost looks exactly like that effect. So sometimes the kind of like the sort of the mistakes, yeah, there are these like, what do you say, sutures or the glitches can be like this really interesting place of creativity. And I think you have to embrace it, because you're going from an extremely complex system, like more complex than you can really imagine, and then to reduce it to a digital form that the computer could process, right, and that you could play back, requires this like extreme simplification. And to do that and not make it like a stick figure, right, is where like to create that elegant simplicity is like incredibly time-consuming and effortful. It requires a lot of creativity and imagination to do it. And then what we were saying is that a potential way to explore it might be, because there's so many, whenever there's a glitch in the body, or whenever there's an error in the body, it creates this a potential for humor, right? If if somebody all of a sudden, the belly is growing wide as you open your arms, like that, I laughed out loud yesterday. It was like, I would go up and down and my belly would just, like widen and narrow, or my arms get stuck inside my belly, right? And to think about all this potential for humor. So we were talking about how there's this, in Lowie's work, I think there's this, conversation between what's the sublime abstraction, where the human kind of figure disappears in a kind of tornado fabric, and then there's also this kind of weird reality of her body in there and seeing the face. And I've even had people say to me, like, maybe you should wear a mask, because there's this discomfort sometimes with the presence of the body, right? And so with the virtual reality, to represent that body in a kind of material, to give the appearance of materiality, creates, like, almost exaggerates that tension between the sublime and the ridiculous, right? Or between the material and the ethereal. And so we were talking about the idea of, like, one potential strategy might be to, like, let the movement, like, kind of move towards greater abstraction, right? Or to kind of continue to kind of refine it in a, like, the sort of more digitally streamlined way. So anyway, I don't know if we're out of time, or like, or if we should have questions, maybe.
Let's have some questions.
Yeah. I'll keep my costume on so I can, because it's warm.
Do you want to show any of the
Oh, yeah, so
clips?
I'll show 2 clips.
We're going to end with showing, before questions, showing a couple of clips of
So-
Jody's choreography and
Yeah.
these motion pictures.
This is only like 30 seconds from the film The Dancer. And this is the choreography as performed by me as a body double. I'm not featured in the film. I taught the star how to do it. But you can see it's a wide angle. And this is a platform here. And it's actually 1.5 meters in the air, so like about this high. And there's mirrors with LED lights in the back. But if you see it in the film, which is the next clip, it's, again, further processed. This is the same clip. So this is how it appears in the film. Right, so it's just cut and edited in a way where the choreography is, it's a collaboration with the editing studio and yeah. And you can watch these clips online on my YouTube channel. They're all there. So, and then we want close-ups of the face and amplified sounds of the fabric, which is a thing. So that's just, I just wanted to show those clips because that's the same movement that Rochele used for the animation.
Thank you, Jody.
I have to ask John did he give Loie a bow?
No, we didn't get that far.
It's got to be very grand.
Yeah, just like that one. Well,
Yeah.
actually,
Yeah,
maybe
we
we
can
should
do
have
some
you do
motion
that.
capture. We can
Later
do
on this
that.
week, I'm going to do another mocap session with Jody, so any requests, we'll take them. Yeah, Judith. Yes, we're ready for questions.
Okay, I got to follow up on the soundscape of the fabric. You said it at the end. Did Loie incorporate the sound of the fabric in her shows?
I know that the soundscape with the more, like this is slightly heavier fabric than what she used, and I have the lighter weight ones, and they make less sound, and she always used the very lightest of the light fabric, and so I'm sure there was a sound to it, but she also would have had a live orchestra playing, and so I don't think she was at that place, I don't think she was at that postmodern place of sculpting the.
How did she use music?
Her musical taste was extraordinary. She had very wide range of, like, from contemporary, at the time to like super classical. So, she went from like Scriabin and Debussy and Grieg, but also used, some of the classics, popular tunes at the time, but also like Beethoven and Mozart and stuff. So, yeah.
Other questions? Comments?
Cool. Did she always have the same lighting setup? Like, was it always front lit, or did she have different angles and options?
So I will definitely talk about that more on Thursday. And I'll have some slides to show you, but her lighting was extremely complex, and that's sort of what she's most known for in terms of her innovation for stagecraft. But she had many different lights, and each one was controlled by an operator at that time, and each one had a revolving disc of gels. So often when you go to a rock concert now and you see the lights kind of flashing on and off and changing color and following, it's like that, only she was the one that did it first with the analog technology. And she would travel with like 20 electricians, and and each one had to know the choreography, and it was all different colors. She would, 20 different lighting instruments shining from, low, middle, high, mostly from the side and from under the stage. creating a kind of harmony, which she had a theory about color harmony that was very much in keeping with the idea of synesthesia at the time, this kind of blending of senses. So.
Other questions? Questions about development? I mean, some of you game design people have any questions about that or anything? Yes.
Hi, John.
Jim, hi.
Why did you choose this type of dancer for your virtual reality game?
Why would I choose this dancer? Well, this particular dancer. Well, I chose this particular dancer because she is the world's expert on the dances of Loie Fuller.
Why did you choose Loie Fuller?
Well, because Loie Fuller, to me, is like the originator of dance technology, right? And so that's why I kind of like the first dancer to incorporate technology as integral to the art form. So without the costume technology, without the lighting technology, it wouldn't be the same thing. And that being my focus in my other kind of art, my stage artwork, it's just kind of my inspiration there. Also, though, it's interesting because the two games that we have, you know, the strong and direct movement, you definitely have to have that strong focused movement in order to move like the way you do in that costume. And also there's a lot of turning in the other game, which I haven't shown you because it's in a state of disrepair, is also this kind of turning stuff. So the way that Loie Fuller moved and the way that Jody moves is in a way very similar to the two movement games, so it works out.
I'm going to just chime in on both those points and just say there is this real resurgence in interest in Loie Fuller now because of her relevance for technology. So she's so important in cinema history. She's so important in when you're looking at projection technology. She's so important in all of these different contexts. And I think understanding her relevance and importance for motion capture and VR is like it's like, I think you're prescient because I think there's a kind of a groundswell of interest in figuring out ways to bring her into these new realms because she was such a pioneer in the field. And then I will just say in terms of the pedagogy, the form itself is, Loie is considered the first modern dancer, and the form itself is very applicable as a pedagogical tool for modern dance students because it does relate so clearly to Laban's theories are very much embedded in modern dance curricula, and Loie is a really great way to access the planes and the greater chemisphere. So I've found it very useful pedagogically. Yeah.
So actually, it's interesting to do these kinds of events because, and this whole workshop week that Jody's been here has been making my mind go, oh, we need to do this in the app and do that in the app. And I think, you know, your question actually brought up maybe in this app, in the historical part of it, trying to focus on this idea of her importance in terms of cinematic history and or just cinema and motion capture and all these kinds of things. So thank you for that question.
Hi, I was just wondering why for the digital rendering, would you have multiple dancers doing the same movement? Because it seems like Loie Fuller was the sole performer.
That was just a matter of, we didn't have too much time, so we had to pack the application so John could go to Italy and present, and then at that point I was just like checking. Was doing like fast iteration to see which colors would render better, which patterns we render better. So it was like very fast, like changing Illustrator and then bringing to Marvelous Designer, uploading to Unreal. And then I would have like I would have 2 bodies and then several garments. And then what would happen sometimes that they got disconnected is that, it was like intrinsic mistake in uploading. The frame rate, the frames didn't upload the same as the body movement, and then that's why it caused for them to become asynchronized. And then some of them are synchronized just because of when I was uploading. And then it was just a matter of like choosing something that we thought that was going to be the best.
Also, I just want to say that she did have a company of dancers. She called them her muses. And they were young girls, and she took them from their parents and toured all around the world. And there would be letters like, "Can you send our kid back, please?" But one of them, a couple of them are interviewed in the recent documentary "Obsessed with Light," which is just now doing the festival circuit. There's a sort of transcript of the diaries of one of those people who was actually in the company and what it was like to be in Loie Fuller's company,
Just a matter of like, I think that everything that I ended up doing has a reason. Like I lined up them that way, like, and then the others, I brought the other 2, and then I lined up that way just because even if you're doing something fast, you can be creative and you can save for later for like something that you might create later. So there's a reason also for that, even though like, yes, it was quite fast.
If I can indulge another question. For you as a dancer, what is the subjective affective experience of dancing in this costume, in those motions? So it must be distinctly different.
So I had my first taste of Loie about 25 years ago, and it immediately got me hooked because it is the expanded kinesphere experience is really seductive, especially if you're maybe a little shy or you're not used to taking up your full space. All of a sudden, in this particular costume, I had 14-foot wingspan in an enormous space, and it just, having been told, like many times by a modern dance teacher to imagine that I had big raglan sleeves or to extend my arms out into space, and all of a sudden I didn't have to imagine, it made it so tangible for me. And having, like, inhabiting these costumes has helped me shape kind of a technique or an idea that we're always having this impact that extends beyond our physical selves. And so it's helped me to have a kind of larger concept of what movement and choreography is, and to think not just about like shape and form of the flesh within the skin, but also to think about choreography as shaping energetic forces that extend beyond what we might think of as our physical form.
Thank you so much. So my next question is for John and Rochele, is how do you translate that incredible affective experience of this kind of dance to your users? So your modest idea is teach them some movements so they can be creative. But is there something about them seeing Loie and dancing like Loie that also invites a different kind of affective experience? Well, she said as the first time in, and is suddenly feeling this extension, she's shy, and all of a sudden her body is not shy. And using an app like this with kids who are, closed down and not expressive and shy, and putting them in this and having them, are they going to see themselves in this costume?
Well, I guess we'll have to do that. I don't know. But the idea was that after you experience the movement training games, as I call them, then and you got your tokens from understanding the history behind Loie, and now I guess her influence on technological development, which makes sense in this VR context, you would get a chance to dance with Loie Fuller. So it's interesting that you talk about that, because maybe that could be something that could be emphasized in the experience, like, get inspired by dancing with Loie to dance even more
And
freely.
I'm thinking just seeing themselves, if at the end of the app, their face in this body, in this costume, that gives them a picture to take, you know, that they have,
Yeah.
right, of themselves, like this imagining, the space of imagining, what you were describing.
That's a cool idea.
Inhabiting the world in this new way. And
One way I was
transformational.
originally going to do this, and we started working on this. I don't know how many of you have ever used Tilt Brush, or what's the other, Open Brush. But it's a, and if you haven't done it, you should do it because it's amazing. Where you move, and it's a 3D painting application. So you can move, and you create all these spaces, shapes around you. So we started actually using that as a way to have people that are doing this to do their motions and have that be seen after the fact. So that's an idea. But I prefer the idea of like having you manipulate that costume. I have no idea how that could be done. If any of you have an idea, let me know. It seems technologically like a mind blower. But yeah, I don't know.
One idea might be, and this is something the conversation we're having.
Yeah.
This is a live collab conversation right now.
Right, we're just figuring this out. If anybody has ideas, let us know.
Is that we do have like specific vocabulary, and so rather than like I mean, it could be a combination of like video capture and rendering. But if you, for instance, like had the specific movements, like the Houdini,
Pre-programmed.
right? The Houdini, or the raise, like or the half umbrella, right? That if you had those, that you could, it might be easier to slot in somebody's face.
It's just like in a video game where you are actually yourself the player, a pretty lame sword fighter. But when you do a decent move in a VR game, you look like you're right. So what you're actually seeing is a finished and final and perfect move. So you wouldn't need to capture their imperfect move. If they fall close enough, they get to see themselves in the perfected, right? So you're using footage you have. You're using imagery you have. You don't have to capture everything that the imperfect student is doing. Just that they're hitting close enough to the marks. They're hitting close enough to the marks, and then if they hit close enough, they see something better than what they've done, actually, right? Something like this as a payoff.
Okay, we'll keep it in mind.
Just a thought.
Yeah.
Oh, this is so impressive. Like, that's the first time I see this artist and the technique. I was curious to see the longer wings, how it looks like, the performance.
Not another plug on Friday afternoon. Is that open to non-dance students?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So I've been working with the dance students, teaching them some of the technique. And on Friday at 1 o'clock, there's what's called a dance forum, which is a weekly event where I think the dance department gets together. And I am planning that the students will do a little showing of what they've learned, and then I will do 2 solos in the big costume. So if you'd like to stop by.
That's Friday at 1 in DRK, which is the studio right next to the one where we meet.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'll remind you.
Thank you. Yeah, and I have a question for Rochele, and I think it's related to what we're discussing about not doing perfect movements and the software understanding, because I imagine that this pushes like the boundaries to like the interpretation of physics from this software, because I'm sure that very tiny movements from the wrist affect like how the mesh moves. And my question was like, is this tracksuit sensitive enough to capture tiny little movements that might translate into like the right movement of the wings?
Yes and no, I would say. Yes, when you are, especially if you are wearing the gloves, it will capture very detailed movements of like even like like joints of your fingers, and then it will capture the movement of the wrist. But then it goes into when you add a garment on it, then becomes a little more complex because at least for that, the garment had to cover the hands, and then that movement at that point we were not really it wasn't really capturing the wrist, so. I believe that's something that would have to test, but I'm pretty sure that if we had created the same animation with the movement, with the wrist movement, you would have done some kind of like, you would be able to see, but there's also the problem when you are simulating the garment that you have to, because when you just like click simulate and then you already have the animation attached to the body, right? So you have this garment that's loose and then you don't have too much control over the simulation. So you have to be like pausing the simulation and kind of like moving the garment. Like there's like, virtual fingers and then placing the garment where you want to be because that's how you control it. So it's quite complex to assign too much movement when you have, especially when you have this kind of like, large garment that there wasn't a workflow for that. So that's something that we had to create. Yeah.
Especially the physics of the material, right?
Yes, correct.
If she wasn't using silk, was another material, I'm sure.
Actually, that's a very good point because when I started designing the garment, that's what I chose. So Cloth 3D and Marvelous Designer, which are this like 3D rendering and simulation of fabrics, they're very precise on representing the material, the physical material in the digital form. So if you select silk, it's going to be simulated as silk fabric would. So in the beginning, it was silk, and even like the first when she was in the lobby, the cape was kind of like a silk fabric, but then in the end became so hard to simulate a certain short of time that we had to finish that I ended up like adding like a velvet feel, and then it was heavier, so it was easy. It was easier to create the garment that would have like a nice movement. Yeah. I hope I...
And also just say that there's many different weights of silk, and this is kind of like a medium weight silk, and you can get, she used extremely lightweight silk, which is very floaty and almost transparent, and she used hundreds of yards of it in a single garment. So it's just a different thing, and when you're using silk can go up to in weight to brocade, like upholstery fabric. So it just depends on the density of it.
And one final word about that, and then I think we're going to end. And if you want to join us for a short workshop downstairs, we're going to show you a little bit about animating characters in real time in VR. I did want to say that one of our conversations this week, which was quite inspiring, was to think about the transformation of the body through this dancing into something else. And so I was thinking, well, what would really be appropriate would be to say, well, we can use VR technologies, digital technologies like particle streams and things like that to actually transform this into and get it out of the representation of a body with fabric, and then like fully transform the dancer into the tornado, et cetera, which I think would be kind of like the cool thing to do. So the user could become a tornado, which would be amazing, like that. Okay. So we're going to end this portion, and if you want, as I say, in a few minutes, we're going to go downstairs to the room below that display over there, which, by the way, I'm mentioning again, is a display of things from the Krannert Art Museum Library about Loie Fuller and about other things that she has inspired throughout a bunch of artists. I lost my train of thought, but thank you very much.